let's jump into it. We're in our fourth class here under the Missing the Mark. And again, just as a quick summary, what we are doing is we're taking this semester to really explore the nature of sin. It's a heavy topic, it's a dark topic, but it's a topic that the scriptures actually address. And so what we're saying is that we want to be people who learn to correct our aim, because we said that the reason that the biblical writers chose the terminology they did for sin, and the predominant definition of the scriptures is that, missing the mark. Sin is missing the mark of what God's ultimate desired target is for you. As we said, that when the biblical writers used that word, they were more conveying the interest of correcting the aim, as opposed to just being Christians who live sloppy lives and go, well, whatever the difference is that I've missed, God's grace will cover it. But instead, the scripture writers are pushing people to correct the aim. Tonight's topic is one which is going to be, you're going to ponder this. And what I mean by that is that I'm going to be asking some questions throughout the course of tonight as we go through tonight's topic. And it's not a topic that I'm expecting you to automatically go, yes. It's not a topic that I'm asking you to automatically agree with, but it's a topic that the scriptures present, and I want you to ponder it. I want you to walk out tonight. I want you to take notes or carry the notes with you, and I want you to think over the next several days, over the course and the content and the concept of what I'm going to challenge you with tonight. Where we're going tonight is we're going to talk about something called social sin. Social sin has nothing to do with social media. Social sin is something that the scriptures address that we want to talk about. What ultimately is it? Here's just a fast definition. Social sin, in simple terms, is sin that's committed by a larger group or society, not an individual. This is different than the sins we commit as individuals. When we think about sin, the majority of us, we think about our own. We think about lying, stealing, cheating, being dishonest, losing our temper, anger, sexual issues, lust, whatever the case may be. We always think, when it comes to sin, we think about our own individual issues. Social sin is different than this. Social sins are sins that are committed by a collective or a group of individuals. And that's where we want to go tonight. And there's a challenge in it. And the reason is because the scriptures speak to this multiple times, and that presents a challenge to the believer, to the follower of Christ who wants to mature. There is a challenge in the scriptures for you to be a part of something larger than yourself, larger than you just going to God asking for forgiveness for your sins. It presents a mission field that we're supposed to adopt. But most people don't even know that this is a topic we're going to address. Notice in Isaiah 1:18, famous passage that so many people know. The Lord speaks to the prophet and says, come, let's consider your options. Your sins have stained you like the color red, but you can become white like snow. And though they are as easy to see as the color scarlet, you can become white like wool. And tons and tons and tons and tons of pastors and Bible teachers and conference speakers will use this verse to address individuals, to suggest to individuals that Jesus can do this for your sins. And he can. We're not discrediting that at all. But I will point to the fact that this verse actually is not being addressed to an individual or to individuals. It's talking about a collective issue. When you consider the context and you go back to the two verses precede it, notice how the Lord talks. He says, wash, cleanse yourselves, remove your sinful deeds from my sight, stop sinning, learn to do what is right. And then notice these charges before he ever gets to the whole, your sins are as scarlet, but they can be white as snow. He says this, he says, promote justice. Give the oppressed reason to celebrate. Take up the cause of the orphan. Defend the rights of the widow. These are issues that are being addressed to a collective group, to a society, to a culture. God's not talking to one individual, because it's unlikely that every single individual in the context of Israel was ultimately not promoting justice. There may have been people in that society that had their heart for justice. It's unlikely that every single person there was ignoring the cases of the widows or the orphans. But it's a collective issue that collectively, together, they were sinning or in sin, and the Lord addresses it as a social or collective. There's collective guilt of everybody because it's something that the culture as a whole is guilty of. You see this actually in Revelation in the first 3 chapters when Christ addresses the churches through the letters. He speaks to them in a collective sense. He doesn't speak to them as a federation of individuals. He doesn't say, well, there's some of you doing this and some of you doing that. No, he addresses in Revelation, he says, this you have good and this you're doing wrong. It's a collective issue. And what's interesting is that when you look at the scriptures, you begin to see people that begin to step in and deal with social sin as opposed to just individual sin. You begin to see individuals who are so passionate for wanting to do God's work, who are so just driven to be a part of God's kingdom that they want to do something about these kinds of sins, this large level of issues of sin that God would look upon a society, a culture, a church, a neighborhood, a family unit, or whatever, and they say, I want to do something about this. The story of Nehemiah is that Nehemiah comes in to help Jerusalem restore its physical structures after having gone through all of its captivity and all of its being broken down. Nehemiah comes in and he wants to physically do something to help his people because these are his people. This is his social group. And we see in chapter 9 that he begins this long prayer of all of these issues that Israel has done wrong. And it's not things that he has done wrong. It's not that he's going, yeah, I messed up and others like me. He's just becoming representative of it. And you see in verse 33 where he speaks to the Lord and he pleads for the Lord. He says, you're righteous with regard to all that has happened to us. You've acted faithfully. It is we, collective, who have been in the wrong. He is saying the entirety of this nation shares the guilt in everything that we've done. There is no, well, but I wasn't actually, Nehemiah, you think about it, Nehemiah could make kind of that, I wasn't actually here during the period, I was in a different place. Lord, I've been faithful to you. No, the others haven't, but I, none of that. It's we. Paul does the same thing. Paul comes in and actually makes this statement where he says, if it was possible, it's not, he knows it, it's a redundant statement, but he says, but if I could be cut off from Christ, if I could take all of the collective guilt of my people and be cut off from them, and they would be saved as a result, he says, I'll do it. Notice the passion of these individuals to not just worry about themselves, to not just address their own sins, to not just worry about how they're personally missing the mark, to not just worry with God about how am I doing, Lord? How am I measuring up, Lord? Am I good? Am I close to you? They become immensely concerned with the social sins of the groups that they personally identify with. And it becomes a mission statement. My challenge tonight is that for people like you, when I say people like you, I mean people who would come out on a Wednesday night, people who would tune in live for us on a Wednesday night as opposed to watching something else, something like Lost. Oops. It's a joke. If you don't get that joke, you have a really, really, really bad short-term memory, and I would encourage you to get in here a little bit earlier on a Wednesday night. But for those of you, what I mean is that there is a charge in the scriptures, and the charge I'm going to give you tonight is that what the scriptures talk about is that there's a maturity pathway where the Lord would love to see you grow from the person who just wants to take care of their sin, they're missing the mark, who begins to say, Lord, use me in larger capacities to correct the issues in our world, in our society, in our culture, in our church, in our family, in our workplace. Use me as representation. I want to go into that place. I will identify with those people. I will plead before you. I will intercede on their behalf. But it's a maturity pathway. Notice how Paul writes about it. He says in Hebrews 6:1, and I always have to make this caveat for anybody who has done any kind of an extensive study around Hebrews. We don't know who the author of the Hebrews is. I personally, and I don't mean I personally as if I've discovered it, I align with those commentators and those in the school of thought that Paul is the author of Hebrews because the writing style is identical, his theology is identical, the author's approach to Christ is identical. So when I say Paul, I'm saying he's the author of Hebrews here. I fully entertain anybody who would say, well, I'm not so sure. That's perfectly appropriate. But the author says this. He says, let us move beyond the elementary teachings about Christ and be taken forward to maturity. And notice how he says this, not laying again the foundation of repentance. This notion of where your Christian life is just you sinning, asking for forgiveness, sinning, asking for forgiveness, sinning, asking for forgiveness. And there are people that is their whole Christian life. They may not be Catholic, but they still treat the church like just one big confessional. I got to come Sunday and get everything right with the Lord. And they walk out Sunday going, I feel good, I feel strong, man, that just spoke to my heart. Pastor, great sermon. Oh, the worship this morning. And by Wednesday, they're going, I can't believe I did it again. That constant laying, again, the foundation of these sins. And Paul says, you are charged to grow up beyond that. Not just because God doesn't like your infantile behavior, but because as long as you stay on the elementary side of things, you are missing out on a mission field of maturity. I love Eugene Peterson's translation here. Eugene Peterson, who translated The Message. It's a paraphrase. It's not a translation the way we would think about it. It's a paraphrase. But there are times where he captures the language, and I love it. He translates the language this way. He says, come on, let's leave the preschool finger-painting exercises on Christ, and can we get on with the grand work of art that God wants to do? Grow up! I love that. Love that. The charge for you as a Christian is not get saved, get involved in ministry, come to church every week, love the music, love the preaching, wait for Jesus. You've heard us say this now a couple of weeks in the sermons. We don't want to be an airline terminal, just waiting for God to come back. There's a charge to grow up, and one of the reasons is because God would seek for us to get involved in what is considered in scriptures as that God's looking for representatives to deal with social, cultural sins of people, groups, as it were. But why don't we talk about this that much? Why is it that social sins aren't really addressed? Why is it that in Christian teaching it's almost always about God's love, His grace, your sin, He'll forgive you, He knows what you're going through. It's all you, as opposed to there's this bigger element. Why do we not really address this? There's several reasons. But I want to ask you this question, and here's one of these questions where I don't want you to answer it. I'm not looking for you to answer it now. I hope you don't answer it quickly. When I first thought through this years and years and years ago, I didn't answer it quickly. But I have a question. Are you liable in God's eyes if you support or endorse an organization or entity through participation or purchasing, meaning you buy their products, that fosters or promotes sin that you personally would never commit as an individual? Don't answer. I'm asking you tonight to honestly just let this rest. Are you liable for the sins of a collective group, social group, organization, business entity, whatever the case is? Are you guilty for their sins if you participate, support, endorse, purchase their products, whatever the case is? Does God look at you and go, well, now you're liable as well? It's a question to ponder. It's not a question to answer tonight. I first came across this years and years and years ago. It is no secret in this church that I love lawns and love coffee. That's all people know about me. Love lawns, love Jesus isn't even in there in my category. That's like Mac, love Jesus, coffee and lawns, But when years and years and years ago, I was in the Starbucks thing before Starbucks had drive-thrus, before anybody knew what Starbucks was. I worked in Boston, and I worked at a marketing and web development company, and I remember a buddy of mine coming in one day in the afternoon. He was like, dude, I need some caffeine. Can we go? Yes, let's go. And if you've lived in the New England area, if you're from Boston, if you know that area, then you know that Dunkin' Donuts is the trait. I don't think it's Dunkin' Donuts anymore. I think it's just like Dunkin' now. But back then, it was Dunkin' Donuts if you were in Boston. But we rounded this corner, and there was this little shop. It didn't even have the corner. It had middle of the Starbucks. So let's go in here. Went in there. What is that? Venti. I don't know what Venti is. None of that stuff. They didn't sell food. They didn't sell pastries, and I wish they wouldn't because that just confuses the mission. That's another rant for another time. I wish they didn't have drive-thrus. Boy, I'm really off track now, but that's my personal passion thing. I wish they would go back to their original roots of just good coffee. But regardless, I would start buying coffee from them because my office was close to them. And in the process of buying coffee from them, a friend of mine at work made me aware of this concept of fair trade coffee. Now, fair trade is not inextricably linked to coffee. Fair trade is an industrial practice, but it's well known in the coffee industry. And what fair trade means is that there are some companies that will take the coffee from the international sellers, whatever countries, whether it's Colombia, whether it's Ethiopia, whatever the case is, they will go in and they will buy the coffee, they bring it back to the States, they sell it for exorbitant amounts of money, which is why you pay $6 for a latte at Starbucks, and for them it costs like 27 cents. But there are some companies that will do that, and they do not return any of the equity of those profits back to the actual coffee farmers in the third world country. So what fair trade does is fair trade establishes principles and practices to make sure that the farmers who are the actual sellers and buyers in the third world country are actually given their fair share of the profits so that they can learn sustainable practices and so that they don't have to do things that are wrong. And one of the things that gets done wrong in third world countries is child labor. To meet supply and demand, young kids are put in the fields, like we're talking 6, 7, 8 years old, for 13, 14 hours a day. It's essentially child abuse. And I was talking with somebody, and I was like, I would never in a million years abuse a child. Now, there's times my son wants me to make him throw him out the window. That's another story. I would never abuse a child. But what if I buy coffee from a company that I know encourages or causes those kinds of practices to take place elsewhere? Am I, by virtue of my connection to that? And so I made a personal decision. I thought, you know what? I am only going to go where, and thankfully years later, Starbucks actually came under that umbrella themselves personally because of how I love their coffee. But from then on, I have always said to myself, I want to, and now almost all coffee organizations are because of just the cultural awareness around it. But back then, you would have to hunt and go, is this a fair trade? And I would think, because no, I'm not physically forcing a child into the sun. But if I'm buying coffee from a company then I am by some, and that was just me. I felt that by virtue of my support, purchasing, I was somehow implicated in it. And so this was the first place, and we're talking 20, 30 years ago that I first started really wrestling with this concept of social sin and the ethics of social sin and what do we ultimately do about it. Here are the reasons that this is one of the reasons that we don't really wrestle with this that much, or we don't really think about it. And the first is, like I just said, we don't truly care when we don't think that we have an active voice or part. The fair trade coffee is a good example. It would be easy to go, I'm not the guy who buys the coffee. It'd be easy to say, I'm not the guy in the field putting the kid there. That's his. I don't have an active voice in that. I'm the guy that buys coffee. And so when we don't have an immediate active voice to change the scenario, we have a tendency to go, I don't need to worry about that. Again, not asking you to agree, not asking you to answer that. I'm tonight challenging you to just ponder what I'm saying here. What is our implication in those kinds of things? Just let it sit in the back for a second. The second reason that we really don't wrestle with social sins or bigger elements of sins of larger groups or cultures is that our perception of reality, right or wrong, is conditioned by the groups that we identify with. Let me illustrate that point this way. I want you to imagine a 68-degree day. Sunny, blue skies, 68 degrees. That's all I'm going to give you so far. That's a meteorological condition. 68 degrees and sunny. But I want to give you two different groups who we are going to have experience that 68-degree day. Group A is a group that's living in the winter. It's January, and they are in the middle of a 3-week stretch where the average temperature has been 36 degrees. That's Group A. You with me? Group B is a group of people that are living in the summer. It's August for them, and they have just gone through a 3-week stretch where the average temperature has been 95 degrees. Let's give both groups a 68-degree day. What is the perception of Group A of that day? It's warm. This is beautiful. This is gorgeous. Man, oh man, look at this day. What's the perception of the other group? It's freezing, right? And not only is their perceptions different, their actions are different. What does Group A do? It's January, but you get this rogue 68-degree day, and people show up in shorts and flip-flops and T-shirts and Frisbee, and let's go to the beach, It's like, what? Yeah, it's 68 degrees. What does the other group do? They put clothes on. Sweatshirts, sweaters. You ever seen this? You get like a cold week in August, like we get a rogue nor'easter comes through in cold weather, and all of a sudden people are putting fleece jackets on. We had this experience earlier this year, back in January. I think it was December. Brian and I took our boys down to Disney, and so we're coming from Maryland, and we get down there and we're standing in line and we're in T-shirts and shorts and we're like, this is awesome. And there's this couple next to us and they're in fleece with like toboggans on and they're like, you guys are clearly out of town. And we're like, this is awesome. So right standing next to each other. They're locals. They're in fleece jackets. We're in T-shirts. But it's 68 degrees. Why is there two different perceptions? Why is there two different actions? It's because the environment that they're in gives a completely, you with me? So let's put this into something a little bit more hard-hitting. Let's not make it a 68-degree day. Let's make it a situation where a person gets pulled over by police without any real apparent cause. The police haven't explained it yet. And let's take two different groups. Let's take one group, which is a black man who has grown up in South Central LA in the 1980s, and that's not a fictional statement. I'm using this illustration because a personal friend of mine who I sat down with months and months ago, and talked through this. We kind of built this scenario together. And let's take the perception of Group B, which is a white man who grew up in a financially comfortable rural area such as Berlin, Maryland. And all we're talking about is just a black person, or a police officer just pulls you over, and you go, I wasn't speeding. The cop hasn't come up to my car yet. I wasn't speeding. As far as I know, I don't have any taillights out. I didn't pass anybody. I didn't run anybody off the road. And what's the perception change? They both experience the exact, just like 68, it's just a standard thing. 60, police pull you over. It happens to everybody. What's the perception of Group A? This is a racist move. What's the perception of Group B? The officer's doing his job. He's protecting our environment. What are the actions that the two different groups take? There may be protests by Group A. On action Group B, there's love our police, man. I mean, I hate that it was me, but I love they're doing their job. And years ago, when our culture was really wrestling through a lot of this different kind of stuff, and let me put you at ease, we're not about to go into some political discussion about any of these, but when we were going through some of these issues, I sat down with a friend of mine and I said, talk me through, and we did this kind of a thing. I said, let me hear, and we're not saying right or wrong on either one of these. I'm asking you to think. That's all I'm asking you to do, just think. But one of the things as we were sitting there is I realized, I said, my perception, my environment changes my perception and my action that I will take based upon just how I grew up. And I listened to him describing what it was like in the 1980s to grow up in South Central LA, walk to high school, have police on a regular basis just walking. He wasn't even old enough to drive a car, and he would say, he said, just happened, Lane. And he said, and so today, he said, I'm not saying right or wrong, and he's not like a rabid anti-police or anything. He's just a gentle Christian guy. He said, but Lane, he said, just because of what happened growing up, he said, I get pulled over and I think, two entirely different perceptions, two entirely different actions. Why? Because environment influences how we perceive our reality, whether we know it or not. You with me? And so because of that, sometimes we don't wrestle with social sins, not because we don't care, but because we just don't know. We're blind. And again, I'm not making a point on this statement here. All I'm doing right now is trying to establish that there are reasons that we only focus on our individual sins. We don't really deal with social sins. And one of those reasons is we don't really know what's going on because of our larger environment. Here's the third reason we don't wrestle with it. The further removed we are from a situation, the less we concern ourselves about the implications or if we have any responsibility. Consider a week or two ago, the Wall Street Journal published something that was incredibly damning for Facebook. The Wall Street Journal got a hold of an internal report, that's the operative words, internal report from Facebook. It was leaked to them. Facebook had run a study because they were hearing some alarming trends and they didn't want these trends to get out into the world. And so Facebook ran an internal audit, an internal survey about the effects of Instagram on young teenage girls. It was interesting that Brooke brought up that illustration on Nair and what she said about how the world, because you're going to see how that connects in just a moment. The study done by Facebook internally, that's again the key thing, discovered that Instagram is incredibly damaging to young teenage girls. Incredibly damaging. These are Facebook's own words. The report said, we make body image issues worse for 1 in 3 teen girls, a slide in the 2019 presentation said. And again, not according to the Wall Street Journal. That doesn't mean that it means that the Wall Street Journal is reporting on the slide from Facebook owns Instagram, if you didn't know that, their own report. Teens blame Instagram for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. One of the other slides on the presentation stated 32% of teen girls said that when they felt bad about their bodies, Instagram made them feel worse. Among teens who reported experiencing suicidal thoughts, 6% of US users and 13% of UK users attributed the ideation that was in their head to Instagram. It's a damaging platform to that social group. I use it. Do I share in culpability? I'm removed from it. I'm not a teenage girl. That's no secret. If I see a spider, I might scream like one. I hate spiders. Snakes, don't care. There could be a black mamba in my house. Wouldn't matter. Let a little wolf spider run across the bedroom floor. I'm not sleeping in that room that night. If we can't find it within 24 hours, we're moving. I hate spiders with a passion. I'm not a teenage girl. I don't understand. So I'm removed from that scenario. But I'm a user of Instagram, and every single person that uses Instagram supports the platform, because the more users, the more advertising, the more that Facebook can do their targeted advertising solutions. So I am supporting a platform that I now know is damaging to teenage girls, giving suicidal thoughts and ruining body image issues. But I'm prone to not care because I'm removed from the situation. Are you with me? So again, what we're saying is we're just saying that part of the reason that Christians stay in the immature state of just worrying about their own individual sins and not really jumping into larger cultural evils and issues is because, well, I don't want to say we don't care, but I want to say we have these issues. We go, well, what's one person? I'm not the person actively making those. You know what? And if I were to bail, it would still go on. I'm not really an influence. That's number one. Two, we don't realize that the environment that we associate with, grew up in, work in, friends, influences our perception of right or wrong. I say it's okay. Another person says, no, that's wrong. Or we're so removed from it that we just kind of go, it's easier to just kind of ignore it. One of Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a theologian during World War II, a German theologian, who was able to actually himself, he was a German theologian who helped guide pastorally and theologically the resistance movement against the Nazis. He was targeted by the Nazis, and they were able to actually smuggle him successfully out of Germany and get him to the U.S. He successfully got his feet he successfully got his feet on American soil during World War II because the Nazis had targeted him. And he went, what am I doing? He said, I'm a Christian. I either believe that God, those are my people. I'm German, those are Germans, that's my land, those are my people, and I just ran. He got back on a boat and went back. Put himself back in them. And one of the things that he noted that so angered him, and the reason he felt like he needed to go back, was because he noted the number of German churches who would come into Sunday service and who would choose to shut their windows and close the blinds and raise the level of the volume of their worship so they couldn't hear the trains carrying the Jews to the concentration camps. Think about that. Let's sing that God is king louder so that we don't have to actually live as if God is king. Because if we believed God was king, we might actually believe we're his subjects and he's called us to warfare to do something. But they didn't want to do that. They just wanted to sing songs and hear a sermon. And he was so bothered by that, he said, I have to identify with the social sins of my people. He went back. He was a loud voice for the church against what was taking place in Germany and against the Nazis, and he paid for it with his life. He was martyred. The Nazis captured him and hung him. But there was that passion, like Nehemiah and like Paul, that said, I do not want to live an immature life of just asking God for forgiveness every Sunday, singing a hymn, and reading a verse on the screen, and going home. I want to do something for God. And he stepped up to the plate. I believe there are challenges for us. Now, how do we get involved in a challenge? How do we ultimately begin to go, well, how should we, what do we do? this could be a 16-part graduate level doctoral course. I have to introduce it in 20 minutes. Unless you guys want to stay till like 3 tomorrow afternoon, and we can roll up our sleeves. And no, what I want to do, seriously, there's a lot of facets to it. I don't want to suggest that it's as simple as just this one last point, which should be point number 3, not point number 2 a second time. Anybody catch it before I did? Really, Annabelle? Really? See, this church loves Annabelle. I work with her. She catches the typos, the problems, the issues, and so I love her, but then there's times where I kind of go, she caught it. She caught the... I just want to take one small little angle on how would we, what's the first step of maturity, and I would say it's this. It is a look and an understanding of how the scriptures use the word world. And again, I love how the Spirit pulls these things together, because without even knowing that it was going in this direction, Brooke used that illustration of the commercial she saw with Nair, and she talked about the messaging that gave, and she said, she said, that's the kind of language the world is communicating. I love that because that's where I want to go. I want you to understand that the scriptures talk about the world in a way that most Christians, I don't think we fully grasp it or get it. I want us to kind of dig into this together. When we think world, we think in English language, the globe, the planet, people, whatever the case. We think the world, the whole, that kind of a thing. If you grew up in Sunday school, then you remember the song, he's got the whole world in his hands. He's got the whole, I'm the only person that grew up in church. And I remember the song. Is Anita here? That's all, see? She taught me that song. I still remember it. I also remember the soldier one, but I can't do it or sing it here tonight. Anyway, John 15, 18, lots of sidetracks tonight because I had caffeine. John 15, 18 to 19, fair trade caffeine, by the way. John 15, 18 to 19, notice how Jesus speaks here. He says, if the world hates you, be aware that it hated me first. If you belong to the world would love you. It's its own. However, because you do not belong to the world, but I chose you out of the world, it's for this reason the world hates you. Notice how Jesus personifies this concept of world. It becomes an entity. It's a force. He's not talking about the globe or the planet, because the planet can't hate you. He's not talking about all the population of the planet, because clearly the population of the planet can't hate you. It doesn't even know you. Instead, the Greek writers of the New Testament, both when recording Jesus' words in the Gospels and Paul and Peter when they're just writing their letters, the multiple uses of the Greek word cosmos to define world is used to describe this. Well, I actually gave the definition here. I said it is essentially defining the realm of mankind, which is in complete opposition. That's what antithesis means, is in complete opposition to God's kingdom. In the fallen state that we live in today, and if you remember when we went through the whole explaining evil course, we really went deep into this whole concept of what evil actually is. But we said it's the sphere of activity where God is not central and he is not worshipped and his kingdom order is not in place. That's the world. The world is any realm or sphere, the collective realm of mankind in a fallen state that is in opposition to God because he is not honored as king, he is not worshipped, and his order is not brought into that place. It is the antithesis of his kingdom. It is the evil, and the scriptures talk about that being in complete opposition to the Christian on this planet here today. It is the realm that you and I walk through every single day of our life. It is the air that you breathe in your workplace. It is the space in your school. It is the space around your football team or your soccer team or your sports team or your men's intramural group at Crown and Salisbury or whatever, and where God's not honored and God is not made central, and it is just the space and the atmosphere and the attitudes and the behaviors and the general concept, and the scriptures present it as this force of just, it is in complete opposition to you. Jesus says, it hates you. It is not just some neutral space that you walk through. And what I want to do is I want to walk through these. I've got about 9 quick points I want to go through, and the challenge in the next 15 minutes is I want you to grasp how the scriptures address the environment that you and I live in a day-to-day basis. Remember what we said about environment. It changes perception, doesn't it? If you're living 95-degree weather and it's 68 degrees, you go, cold. But if you're in 32-degree weather and it's 68, you go, it's warm. Environment changes perception, and Christians sometimes don't realize the degree to which the world seduces us and puts us completely to sleep so that we won't perceive the social and cultural sins around us, because if we were aware of them, we might actually get involved and do something. You follow? So we said that the concept of world is completely opposed to God. It's not neutral. It's completely opposed to God. It is against you. If you are not actively advancing the kingdom of God in it, it is actively pushing the kingdom of the adversary against you. It's not neutral. It's one of the dangers we have. Is we have a habit as Christians of thinking that we get saved, we come to church, and there are sometimes demonic activity, and there's sometimes that God does supernatural stuff, but we think that the in-between is just us going to work, having fun at the beach, going to the movies, watch some TV, make some pizza, have some friends over. We think all that is neutral. It's not. It's not neutral at all. Either you are advancing God's kingdom, or the world is pushing back against that. When I was in high school, I was a cross-country runner, and I was Eastern Shore boy, so all of our cross-country running was flatland, with the exception of the city park, which our coach ran us, that was the only hills we could find. And the reason we ran hills is because States was in Hereford County over in Baltimore, outside of Baltimore, I think. And that was mountains. To us, perception, right, environment. To them, it was like, no, we practice here every day. But when Eastern Shore would go to States and cross country, it might as well have been like this. And one of the things they would do is they would walk the course with you before you ran it. That was required. The host team would walk the visiting teams the course so that it was a level playing field. They didn't want you to have to learn the course the first time you ran it, because the home team knows it well, so they would walk it. And we went into this one part of the course, which was literally on the side of a mountain, and he goes, you turn here and you go up this path. And I remember looking at the path, and I was like, it looked like Everest to me. And I remember what he said. He said this. He said, to those of you, he said, to my Eastern Shore friends, he said, I'll give you a little tip in running. This was the host coach. He said, don't stop anywhere on this course. He said, in your world, you have the ability in the middle of a race, if you're tired, to stop and stand and take a breath. He goes, I have news for you. If you stop here, you will go backwards. He said like this. He said, on this part of the course, one of two things is happening. You are either going up or you are going down. There is no such thing as stop. And he was right, because I remember on the course, and there were people that your legs are burning, you stop, and I can remember seeing people there was no neutral ground. The scriptures present the world like that. There is no such thing as neutral. You are advancing the kingdom, or you are being pushed back on spiritually, whether you know it or not. You follow? The second thing is that it talks about the fact that there are directly contradicting worldviews. Notice the passages we're going to look at. 1 Corinthians 1:21, for since in the wisdom of God, the world by its wisdom did not know God, God was pleased to save those who believe by the foolishness of preaching. 1 Corinthians 1:27, a little bit possibly clearer. God chose what the world thinks foolish to shame the wise, and God chose what the world thinks weak to shame the strong. Notice the use of the word world. And let me just, without trying to break this down in some deep theological point, let me just kind of summarize it. How God views and how the world views are completely opposed. It's why the world thinks nothing of abortion. That's women's rights. It's reproductive health. It's a right. What are you doing? Of course it's opposed, because the air of the world breathes what is antithetical, completely opposite to God. God says life, and the world says individual rights. I'm just using that as one example. You follow with me? Understand, again, that what we're doing is we're showcasing what the scriptures, go back to true north. If we use the scriptures as our guide and not our own personal opinions, the scriptures tell us that the environment that we live in on a day-to-day basis is opposed to God. Just this past week, I noticed this article that came out which said that Will Smith and his wife Jada, they've decided not to be monogamous anymore. And the reason is they said, marriage can't be a prison. Hear the words? Hear it? From God's standpoint, marriage is a blessing. Marriage is a gift. Marriage is the illustration on earth of his relationship to his creation. It is to be celebrated. It is not prison. It is everything but. What's the world's view? I'm bound to one person. You catch it. Just small little nuances in the atmosphere show how the world, the sphere in which we live in, is opposed to everything of God's blueprint. And we breathe this stuff in. You'll pull something like that on your phone, and you'll see a headline like that, and you'll go, and you won't think anything about the fact that you just breathed that in. I'm not saying you can't read these things. I'm just saying, as Christians, we are supposed to be aware of how, like Brooke said in her thing, where she said, Nair's little thing, I don't remember the statement entirely, but all of you agreed that when she said what Nair's statement was, you all went, that's wrong. Of course it's wrong. But that's how the world communicates its values and its messages. The third is that this is a spiritual reality. It's not just a natural thing. We're not just saying that the world's really screwed up, and because the world's really screwed up, everybody's just confused. No, it's a spiritual. It is an active spiritual force that drives the world's mindset and the world's view. Paul puts it and says this. He says, we have not received the spirit of the world, but the Spirit who is from God. Notice the contrast in his writing. We have the Spirit of God, but he doesn't say we are not people who just look at the world's values. He says the Spirit, it's a spiritual entity. And I don't mean a prince, I don't mean a territorial prince or some of the teachings that I'm just saying that Paul presents this dilemma as a spiritual realm dilemma, not just a physical confusion in principles and values concept. It's a spiritually driven thing. It's something in the spirit realm, and it requires us to spiritually discern these things. Fourth, I said this earlier, but I'm going to reiterate it here. I said it's not neutral space, but a strategically organized misdirect. Notice how he writes here in Ephesians 2:1, the first two verses. He says to the Ephesians, although you were dead in your offenses and sins in which you formerly lived according to this world's present path. Pause. According to this world's present path. Other translations say, according to the course of this world. The world that we live in, the atmosphere, the attitudes, the behaviors, the spiritual realm around us, the spiritual things that take place, the opposition to God, it is not just a crazy chaos of just bubbling disorder. It is an intentionality to push people from God. It is a course. It is a path. When you're on that path, when you're aligning with the world's values, when you're agreeing with the world's values, when you're sinking those things in, you are, and this is where it pairs with our course, the social sin, the social, the cultural, collective sin is steering people off the mark. It is changing their aim, and Christians swallowed it in too. It's why you can have a conversation with a person who says that they are a follower of Christ and they have absolutely no problem with, and fill in the blank, whatever that is. And you go, scripturally, that's how powerful this ultimate force is. Fifth, the most basic fundamentals oppose God. I'm going to have to explain this one, but I want to use a passage to do that. What do I mean by the most basic fundamentals of the world oppose God? It's not these lofty ideas, but it's just the most basic steps. Paul says, be careful not to allow anyone to captivate you through an empty, deceitful philosophy that is according to human traditions. And then he uses this phrase that trips up a lot of theologians, a lot of commentators. It says, the elemental spirits of the world. What is that? What are the elemental spirits of the world? The Greek word doesn't really help that much. Stoicheia means a letter of the alphabet. It means element of the alphabet, which is why it gets translated into English as elemental spirits. but it literally just means an element of the alphabet, a letter. And the reason that word is used is because it's the way that we would say, that's just the ABCs. You may have said this. You may have said that's just the standard operating procedures of our company. That's the ABCs of how we operate. That's it. Literally is kind of talking like that. I said Paul's pointing to the most basic principles of the world, the rules and operating procedures that people adapt and adopt to, i.e., to get ahead in life, you have to sacrifice personal relationships. That's like a basic principle in our world. My wife and I love that show, Shark Tank. Love that show. I will present theories in our home like that idea. I'll come in and say, hi, my name's Lane, and I am the owner of a new dinner idea, and I am here to present my company in exchange for 10% of my love and affection back to my company. My idea is hamburgers from Five Guys, and my family will go, no, and I'll go, wait a second, let me tell you how this is. We talk in the language, but one of the things you'll notice if you've watched the show for a long time is the sharks will give advice to these up-and-coming entrepreneurs, and one of the advice that is often given over and over and over again is that if you want to be successful, if you want to be a millionaire, you're going to have to make personal sacrifices. You may have to, for a period of time, put family second. Hear it? Put your family second. Burn your personal life. Pursue the success. That's a basic principle in our world. Years ago, when I was on the beach patrol, I was a young second-year guard, and I got positioned on 48th Street. This is back when there was not that monstrosity of a hotel. There was the Ocean Club. Anybody? And the Ocean Club was a great, just island music, and I got assigned, that was crew 8, and so I got assigned to it, and I was assigned as the crew chief. And I worked, Bobby, you're going to be able to identify with this big time, but I worked in an era of the beach patrol. It was a small little era, but there was a period where there was a little bit of the good old boy network. It was like you didn't advance necessarily based on skill. It was like kind of like who you know. And so my crew chief, who was a well-known guy, a well-known guard, it was a rainy day, and we pulled back to the Ocean Club pool deck because the guards don't leave when it rains. They just pull back to cover. You have to watch your water still. So we pulled back, and my crew chief said, "Lane, here's the radio. I'll be back." About 10:30 in the morning, he split. 10:30 goes by, 11:30 goes by, 12:30 goes by, 1 o'clock. It's been 2.5 hours. He's gone. I don't have a clue where he is. And then the office calls in. Base to 48th Street. I freeze. Base to 48th Street. Go ahead for 48. Crew chief, I won't say his name. I'll make it Smith. That wasn't his name. Is Crew Chief Smith there? Negative. Can you have him call us when he gets back? 10-4. Hour later. Base to 48. He's not back. Go for 48. Crew Chief Smith back? Negative. I hear the frequency on the radio. You can hear the frequency will switch because it goes to a separate channel. Unit 5 to 48, that's my lieutenant. Go ahead. Where is, he says his name, Bob. It's not his name, it's not Bob. Where is he? I don't know, sir, he's gone. What do you mean gone? He left at 10:30 this morning. He comes back across the dunes about 20 minutes later because they called his house. Comes storming up there. What is your problem? And I'm backing up thinking he's going to take a swing at me. And I said, what? He goes, what is up? He goes, why didn't you cover for me? And I said, what do you mean cover? He said, tell him I'm swimming. Tell him I'm working out. Tell him I'm running on the beach. He said, why did you tell him where? I said, I didn't tell him where you were. I just told them you weren't here because you weren't, and I didn't know where you were. And he said, you're off my crew. He didn't have that authority, but I thought he did. So about 10 minutes later, my sergeant comes driving down, and I was like, I'm going to go tell my sergeant. I'm not dealing with this. So I ran up to my sergeant, and I was like, he's Lane, whoa. And I said, what? He said, Lane, if you want to move forward, you're going to have to learn some things. Now, I'm given a bad picture of the patrol. It was a couple of bad apples, and I happened to get thrown into that basket. There were tons, but I was thrown in the middle of this, and I was like, and I said, what do you mean? He said, Lane, because I'm just saying this, learn how to cover for your crew. And I said, no. And he said, really? And I said, no. I said, I will defend my crew. I will give my life for them. I will do anything. But it should not require me to surrender my own personal ethics. I said, I shouldn't be required to lie. And he went, oh boy, we got one of them. And he drove away. And I can remember thinking, I'm done. But in that environment, in that little world, and when I say that little world, in my social group of that little world, there were the simple, basic ABCs of how you operate. And you know what I'm talking about, because you have worked in work environments, you have been in office situations, you have been around groups of friends where there is an expectation of how and you know in your heart, it violates your basic sense of morality and integrity and truth. But it's the simple, basic principles. And so when Paul says that there are elemental spirits of the world, he uses this word where he goes, it's the alphabet, but it's a spiritual thing. He goes, the basic principles, the basic guidelines, the things the world's going to tell you. You want to succeed? Do this. You want to be rich? Do this. You want to be happy? Do this. Look out for yourself. Your spouse not get you go. You deserve it. There are basic principles that the world breathes into us, and Paul says that is a spiritual thing that is seeking to move you off the mark, and the entire culture collectively is guilty of that atmosphere. You follow? You go out into that every single week. You leave Sunday morning worshiping the Lord, breathing in his air, letting his spirit move in this place, and then you're thrust out into the world where just the basic ABCs of operation are completely opposed to the God that you just praised and claimed was your king. And if you don't know that, if you're not aware that it's even trying to do that, you will swallow that stuff in thinking, well, it's just, God understands. No, he doesn't. Well, he understands. He knows what's going on. But this is what I said at the beginning of the challenge. The challenge for the Christian is not to go, God's grace will cover it, but to go, I'm going to change this. I stayed on that patrol for nearly 10 years. Every single person in that bad batch was gone within 12 months of that day. More than just that, when I was on the patrol, there was only one officer that even remotely professed to be a Christian. By the time I left, 90% of the officer corps were committed believers to Jesus Christ. It's no credit to me. But when we stand up, when you stand up and you say, I'm not going to run, I'm not going to leave, I'm not going to quit, but I am going to be a representative of the kingdom, I will come and I'm going to stand for what I believe. And I say all that because we got to get moving, it's already, but let me kind of show this and go back to the fifth one real quickly. The scriptures say that the entirety of this realm, the world, the entirety of it is under Satan's control. We know that we are from God, and the whole world lies in the power of the evil one. The enemy is the one driving these things that we walk in. The enemy is the one influencing culture. If he can change the air, then he can get everybody, and by air I mean the spiritual realm, then he can get everybody breathing that to start to do what he wants them to do, including Christians. The number of Christians, when and I'm going to step on some toes here, so just hang on. It's what I do. It's what pastors are supposed to do. But the number of Christians, friends of mine, that I would talk to, and we would get talking, and this is back when Game of Thrones came out on HBO. And you're talking to a guy that grew up fantasy genre, Lord of the Rings, The Hobbit, Piers, Anthony Zanth novels, Star Wars. Yes, Star Wars crosses from science fiction over into fantasy genre, Jedi, Knights. Game of Thrones came out, and I heard that HBO was releasing this Lord of the Ring big budget, and I was like, yeah! And I got about halfway through the first episode before the porn started. Yeah, the porn. It's an HBO show. I'm not talking nudity. I'm talking like done with that. And then I would talk with friends, Christian friends, who would say, man, did you see the last episode? And I'd say, how are you doing this? I would say, help me out here, because I want to watch this. How are you doing it? It doesn't bother me. That's baloney. doesn't bother me. Oh, you may not think so, but that's why I'm teaching you this. Paul says that the world we live in is a spiritual realm completely opposed to God that the adversary controls. And when he controls the air and the atmosphere that you breathe in, it changes you. Remember, 95 thinks one way of 68, 32 thinks the other way. So if the adversary can change your environment, he will change your perception of what is right and wrong. And Christians do this all the time. They become new Christians. They have this fresh sensitivity to sin and what's wrong. And you meet them 10 years later, and they've grown callous because the enemy has done that to them. Look, and I hear this all the time. Look, half of the stuff laying on Netflix is like, it's brief. You don't and you don't realize that you have adopted a world principle, which is that if you want to have good entertainment, you have to digest small bits of what you know violates God's principles. That's an ABC of the world. And so people will go, it's not. Just let it, leave it there. Think about that. Satan will directly use this control to influence the Christian. When he came to Jesus and said to Jesus, hey, look, all the kingdoms of the world and their grandeur, I'll give you these things. He wasn't lying. It was within his realm to give the earthly stuff because he controls that. But there was a exchange that was going to take place. I will give them to you, Jesus, if you just bow down to me. And he gives the exact same offers to you and I every single day. You want to move forward in that business? Then you're going to have to adopt those principles. You want to pursue the happiness that you're looking for? You're going to have to cross God's boundary lines in this way. He makes those, and he can make those offers because, and this is the key of this point, because Paul says he does, in fact, Satan, control the air of this world that we live in. And by air, not the H2O, but the spiritual atmosphere, the principles, the concepts, the powers, the basic ABCs, all of that, we live in it. And that environment changes us, whether we know it or not. I'm going to bring this to a close. Jesus calls us to remain unstained by the world. James 1:27, pure and undefiled religion before God the Father is this, to care for orphans and widows in their adversity and to keep oneself unstained by the world. You ever wear a white shirt and eat Italian with red sauce? What is your attitude eating Italian with red sauce, wearing a white dress shirt versus wearing a black t-shirt that you changed the oil in the car in? How do you eat any differently? I do. If I come from out working in the yard all day and my wife puts dinner down, I'm just, and she's like, your shirt, really? I'm like, it's a shirt, it's got oil. Who cares if it's car oil or, dressing oil? But if I'm dressed and ready to run out the door for church or whatever the case is, and she puts food down, it's, like, okay, get the OxyClean ready because I can do this and it will somehow still end up back here. We have this attitude of, I don't want to stain it, right? The call from God to you and I when it comes to our walking in this world is to not get stained. There is to be a sensitivity of the environment around us. More than that, we're called to be a light. I'll stop on this one. Philippians 2:14-15. Do everything without grumbling or arguing, so that you may be blameless and pure children of God without blemish. Though you live in a crooked and perverse society in which you shine as lights in the what? World. We're not just called to not get stained. We're called to actually be beacons in the world. The call of the scriptures, the challenge, is for us to become aware of what is considered to be social sins, where collective environments, your office, your family, your home, your friend network, your society, your ethnicity, the political environment that you identify with, that the maturity that the scriptures talk about when it comes to sin is that we start out with God dealing with just our own personal individual ones. God, I recognize jealousy. God, I recognize hate. I'm angry all the time. God, help me. God, help me. God, help me. But then Paul says that we get past that foundational lane of repentance and we begin to mature to the point where we start to go, I want to be like Nehemiah, I want to be like Paul, I want to be like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, I want to be somebody who identifies my social group, my social circle, and I see the attitudes and the behaviors that are wrong, and I want to be put in place by God to be a light and to change that environment. And to do that, I will identify with it, meaning I will begin to intercede the way Nehemiah did for those cultural, social sins, not just my own. God, this is what's wrong with my ethnicity, this is what's wrong with our current culture. This is what's wrong with America. This is what's wrong with my office place. This is where my family, God, I'm not going to be angry at my family. I'm not going to be angry at that cousin or at that uncle. This is something our family has had wrong. Lord, I want to be used by you to have you forgive the sins of this collective. But you can't do that if you're constantly letting the environment blind you to those things around you, where you just start to just kind of, that's just our family. Oh yeah, that's my office place, man. That's just the way we operate. Exactly. But God may have you there not so you can swallow it and begin to live like that, but that you can be the light unstained to actually go before the Lord and intercede for those social sins. He's placed you there for a reason. He calls you to mature and become the intercessor for that. You follow? Think. As you leave tonight, ponder this. You don't have to agree with everything I said in this, but I would challenge that over the course of the next 7 days, you'll be able to identify some social group, social circle, something that you are a part of where you go, you know what, I have gone along with those values too long. You know what, I have gone along. I need to change that and begin to go, God, how would you use me to seek the forgiveness of those things by being a representative for you? It's a call to maturity for all of us, and it's a call for me to get off the stage because it's 8:11 and it's time to go, and that's a cultural sin as me going over. God forgive me. I'll see you guys next week.